Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third day of our workshop on digital libraries. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Ilka Agricola, something similar to that, talking to us about the project Math for VIP. Take it away.
Thank you very much. So, thanks for having me here. As some of you may already have noticed from discussions, I'm a differential geometer. And so I'm going to explain to you what I understand by a digital math library. And this has almost nothing to do with my own research topic. So if you want to hear anything about Berger's theorem, special holonomy manifolds, I'm your contact person, right? But if not, then be fine to skip that for today. So,
I'm so sorry. I thought he was going.
Yeah, I think it has to be red. Sorry.
Fine. Yeah. Okay. Good. So I'm basically here in my duty as a representative of the Committee on Electronic Information and Communication, and I'm going to tell you what this is and what it has to do with digital math libraries. I started getting interested in these things as president of the German Math Society a few years ago, and in particular, this is how I started collaborating with Robert, right? Okay, so I have exactly one slide on my project Math for VIP, which is going to be the first, and then we switch to something else. Okay, so here it is. So Math for VIP means making math accessible for visually impaired people, right? And the reason is that Marburg is the German capital of the blind. Maybe you didn't know. So just by pure coincidence, in the middle of the First World War, where because of these two horrible gas attacks, the number of blind soldiers was rising tremendously, it appeared that there was felt a need to do something for these people, to give them an education. And out of that grew this idea to create a high school, to have options for professional training for blind and visually impaired people. They created a boarding school, specialized libraries, so audio libraries and braille libraries, which is now, of course, an international library. They developed tools. The stick for blind people was actually invented in Marburg, and many other things which make life slightly easier for blind people. So this is the reason how this came, and as a consequence, Marburg being a charming little medieval university town of reasonable size, if students come or children come to Marburg to go to that school, very often they stay, and therefore approximately 50% of the visually impaired students in Germany study in Marburg. Right? So soon after I arrived in Marburg, I had a blind student knocking on my door saying, "I'm taking my calculus class from you this semester. What do you have for me?" And you can imagine that would be the kind of question we all are kind of, well, surprised. Okay? So we are there for dealing with problems and to solve them, and when we do it a systematic approach. And so the clear problem is, the real challenge is to make anything which is not linear textual information accessible for blind and visually impaired people. That's the most important part, right? Because it cannot be done with screen readers, and if you have a complicated formula expression, getting it on a braille line is extremely challenging. So there are solutions for that, but the problem is that this is not standardized, and the solutions, there's nothing really prepared for university level, at most high school level. Okay? So normal textbooks, what you normally get in your departmental library or digital documents, are basically inaccessible. And so the goal we have is, we are creating a web portal for blind students, for their professors and assistants, in the sense that typically blind and visually impaired students would hire a student which is in the same course as them to help them to overcome certain of the challenges, right? But these people, they know the material, but they are not trained for the duty of assisting a visually impaired person, okay? And so we give them whatever they need to fulfill their task, and at the end, for studying successful and having a rewarding academic experience. Right? We don't my destiny is to teach math, right? And I don't want to leave anybody out. Very easy. Okay, so this is not really a research project, but I would more see it as an infrastructure project, right? Part of it is standardization to give best practice recommendations, the do's and don'ts of having blind students in your classroom, and anything else on this may be found on our webpage. Now, be aware that we are not a huge group, and of course we don't have huge amounts of money. If you know any sources, I'm happy to know. I am interested in any connections, and yes, send us an email. We are there for this task. We're interested in all contexts and experiences you may have. Okay, end of the advertising section. So now let's get to CIC. So CIC is one of the standing committees of the International Mathematical Union, and we do agree that the name is a bit strange. The name is kind of old-fashioned because it's more than 25 years old. So in 1998, in the late 90s, this was the time where archive was created, departments started having their first web pages, with mathematical reviews, and Centralblatt had their first online versions. So try to get back to the feeling of the late 90s. And so there was the feeling that there was a need to accompany the transition of the math community into the digital age, and to provide guidance and recommendation for this future, to endorse standards, articulate best practice recommendations on the issues which were relevant, and also to see what the opportunities of the new technology might be in order to develop something which at the time was still obscure, but still lurking in the background, was clear there were things coming. So what would be a good digital or electronic infrastructure? Okay, and this is where the name comes from. And we are on the point of changing it. Good. So this is an international committee, so at the moment I'm chair, that's the reason why I'm speaking here. But you may recognize a few people you know here, and in particular, Kevin Buzzard, I think, was here a few weeks ago. Right. So he is one of the people in that business. Now, how is the IMU working? Who of you has had any, I understand that some of you are computer scientists, but so those who originally come from mathematics, who has ever had any contact with the IMU? That's not an empty set, that's good. So, the International Mathematical Union, of course, one of her largest duties is to organize the International Congress of Mathematics every 4 years. Next one going to be 2026 in Philadelphia. But, so there's more than that. It really works similarly to United Nations, because the members are not individuals, but the national societies of the countries. So yes, in IMU there's a lot of talking going on, but looking at the modern world, it's still better if people are talking if they're not talking. That's my point of view. And this is the only structure which helps to build an international math community in a kind of organized way, such that nobody's left out of it. And that's nothing, right? I mean, that's a big thing. And to take responsibility for how we want to shape this community. So, from my point of view, this is part of the self-administration of science, and if we don't organize ourselves, then the others are going to take decisions for us, and usually the outcome is going to be less rewarding. A working example of this is the career of open access, which at the beginning was the idea of the community to have, to make publicly funded results available to everybody, independently whether your library has a subscription, and then big publisher houses lobbied to transform it into a different kind of business model, which ensured that they would not gain less money than they did before. Okay. So this good idea was kind of taken over and hijacked almost, right, by publisher houses, and now we have problems of the different kind at the situation. Okay. Good.
more problems because the old ones carry on and we have the new ones. So.
Absolutely. So we get the worst of both worlds in some sense, or the challenges of both worlds. And yeah, that makes it difficult. Okay, so we have. So consequences, since our members are not individuals, but the idea in organizations, that means that we typically, or the IMU typically does not have a direct contact to the people involved. So that means that we always rely on the information getting through to the members through the presidents or secretaries of the national organizations, and this is a leaky information channel, right? From the point of view of coding theory, this is a nightmare. You have to repeat your messages a lot of times to have a certainty that it goes through, and we don't have direct feedback opportunities. And therefore, I decided for anything which concerns the whole community, to start giving talks whenever I have an opportunity at a meeting or place where I am, in order to trespass these difficulties. Okay? And obviously the bottom line is publishing concerns everybody, clearly. And in many roles which change during our career. So we all start probably as readers. Then after a successful master of a PhD thesis, we want to become authors. Then quicker than some of us believe, you become a reviewer. Later maybe an editor, a supervisor, a dean or director of some institution, and finally an evaluator where your role is to hire other people or to compare for promotion, tenure, and other things. Right, okay. Now, so what are the challenges of an international approach to publishing? Well, many. Some are in traditions. So depending on the country and the region of the world, there is more the point of view of creating revenue from publishing versus science infrastructure. I mean, publishing viewed as public science infrastructure. Yeah, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, just could you go one slide back?
Yes, of course.
Like you, in this community, which is sort of related to software development, when you see something like no direct feedback opportunities, it really feels like 40 years back. Like, don't you guys have email for discussion for Zoom?
We do. Okay, maybe opportunity is the wrong word. The problem is more that individual societies rarely take up the task of, there's a question, a problem, right? It's being addressed to the national societies. We ask them for feedback, and then you get feedback from at most 5%.
Yeah, but we had the same in AI, the European AI community was this federation of the national AI communities. And then like 6 years ago, some people just said like, screw it, we will do something else, and we will have like a direct mechanism for talking to the AI people in Europe. And it works like in like reasonably new ways, and like it's much more efficient. I don't see why.
Okay, I will be happy if you tell me how you do it. It has to work at an international scale, right? The Mathematical Society of Ghana, New Zealand, or Chile has to be just as comfortable with it as people in Europe.
Yeah.
But and we're happy for any suggestions how we can make this better. At the moment, I see it as a problem that this is not creating enough back and forth exchange. But yeah, thanks. Perfect. Okay, right. So the money for publishing has to come from somewhere, clearly. So money has to be involved, and publishing for free, we know by now this is impossible. Yet the question is how much money is needed and how much is benefit. So creating revenue versus viewing publishing opportunities as a public science infrastructure. This is more the point of view that's not going to surprise you, which is dominant in Northern America. Right? Whereas public science infrastructure, a wonderful example of that is the Centre Mersenne in France, right, who really is funded by the French government in order to offer this infrastructure. The point of view very strong in France, but obviously to some other countries it seems almost like communism, is that the public pays for the research. And just as universities are running computing centers, right, they should also be running some kind of publishing opportunities. Doesn't have to be every university, right, but still something. Legal differences make a big part of the problems, like author's right versus publisher's right. I mean, copyright, is that actually protecting the author or the publisher? Actually more the publisher. And of course, differences in research funding, governance structures, federal versus centralized, autocratic versus democratic, and so on. And despite all these differences, in all these countries, there are mathematicians and they want to be able to do math and to take part in this international exchange. And finally, something we have been seeing rising in the past years is that science infrastructure and publishing opportunities is a means to gain influence. And as far as diplomats go, putting China behind is already something I would probably get in trouble with, but I do it nevertheless, because we have to be aware of that. There were serious attempts to move the archive to China. I mean, there was an offer from China to move it, and it was a serious offer. Archive didn't accept it, but it existed, right? And the archive is something we would all consider part of our vital infrastructure. So it concerns us all. But the rights are owned by Cornell University. If Cornell would go bankrupt tomorrow, what would it mean for us? Okay, good. And this influence is in particular very visible in Africa and in East Asia, where science funding is always a problem. And so Chinese representatives offer support, and by support, influence, whether they want or not. Yes.
I have a question. In computer science, there's a big player called the ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I know, it's supposed to be a non-profit thing, but it's neither supposed to create revenues, or at least the non-profit thing says, in a certain sense, it's not supposed to create revenues, but it's not exactly a public science infrastructure. And this is creating a lot of discussions, at the least, these days, because they have like very expensive rates and so on. So I was interested in your opinion on where does it stand? Is it on the left? Is it on the right? Or is there other?
Right. So here the emphasis was on publishing, but of course one has all the national or some scientific societies.
No, it's the publisher. It's publishing like most of the like, super hype, the proceedings of the super selective.
So where is the legal organization based?
It's the US based.
Yeah, they claim to be international, but
If I may put another situation on this, I mean, so there's the professional societies, as Ilka says, right? But professional societies vary quite a lot. So I would like to mention the linguists, because the linguists have the best of this situation. All their stuff is publicly available on the web. The ACL is my motto, is what I want to be, right? I think mathematics should just be like the ACL, the Association for Computational Linguistics. Because, as you know, there's this huge conversation going on about how come the ACM actually says it's public science infrastructure, but it's not. They're kind of just amassing money and people are discussing it.
And we have like problems these days, in particular in France. In France, it's a bit in a special situation, as you said. And I mean, publishing in ACM venues is becoming extremely expensive. And they're
actually forbidden by the Centre National de la Recherche, right?
And therefore we have a problem.
Yeah.
It's where top most conferences in certain areas have their proceedings published, and
young people need to publish there, otherwise they don't get a career, but officially they are forbidden.
It seems to me it's even something a bit different than...
Yeah, you're right. No, the role of national societies is still a difficult one, and maybe I'm going to include that as a point here, because so many societies have this double role as being a society and a publisher. So this is very clear from the AMS, which is also operating on a US-American, right, creating revenue, being the largest math community and therefore having kind of a monopole structure. On the other side, you have people, like the Société Mathématique de France, right, which gets very good support by its government. German Math Society is in between. We don't get support by the government, so that means we're extremely poor. Because you need to run a headquarter, you need offices, and just by member fees, this is almost impossible to assure. So yes, there's a problem. We see the problem. Yes.
I would like to mention a niche project out of France that I found very interesting because it was launched by open science advocates in biology, as a sort of reflection on their work and the fact that their work was leveraged by big companies, sometimes with a negative climate impact.
Yes.
So they realized that openness wasn't necessarily a good thing, and they came up with a solution to that, which was a licensing right. So it's leveraging their author's right to build a license that is similar to GNU or to GPL, sorry. So a viral copyleft license on the material they produce. It's called usage rights.
Okay.
And basically it's a way to build a community around collectively licensing or leveraging your author's rights to create a corpus aligned with a specific cause. So in this case, climate.
Okay.
But one of the goals could be to align it with moving towards public science infrastructure. So
Right.
you could have a collective mechanism for licensing that says to a publisher, you can publish my material, but any secondary usage is conditional on approval by all collective of authors.
Okay, that works at an international scale.
So this is a license, and that's
Yes.
more of the advantage because it's a license, which means 5 people in one country can can decide to use this license, and 5 people in another country, and they can start building community of people using this license.
Okay.
It's really bottom up.
Okay.
So it's a very different approach, but it tries to resolve many of the things that you have there.
Perfect.
And
I took a note, and you give me some details afterwards so that I can reflect. That's exactly the kind of ideas which we need in our committee to see what options we haven't seen yet so far, because they come from other topics like climate and other things. And ACM, that was, tell me again. This, I'm not a
ACM is the
Association
Computer Machinery.
The computer science AMS.
Computer machinery.
Yes.
and they have the same problem actually that they can't use that license. There are French employees who are not allowed to use the license they wish to be using because they have to be fully.
Lawyers are equal.
Okay, good. So, just by that feedback, you see how large the problem is. And we haven't even reached the core. So, here's an example of how our committee works, right? So what we try to formulate is recommendations for the community so that national societies or universities can say, hey, this is what they recommend, and that's what we want to implement at national level. So one example is that we have new best current practices for mathematics journals. So that was updated in 2021, can be found on our webpage, or you just email me. And for all of these things, in order to hold at an international scale, right, so here the guiding principles were transparency, integrity, and professionalism, and from that deduce key recommendations that we hope societies are going to implement, or libraries going to refuse certain journals or packages saying it doesn't match, right? So it helps to build an opinion and a view on the situation that we are not, we have these huge publisher houses on the other side, and we need to build an opinion about what we believe is the right way. Okay. So we have ongoing topics. First is the access to back issues of mathematical journals. There was a recent survey among publishers on that. That's also the kind of things we also do. and GDML, the vision of a global digital math library, the challenges of citation cartels and predatory publishers for the community, and these two in square brackets, meaning I'm not going to talk about them today, the future of mathematical archiving and research data infrastructure, and new challenges ahead, what is the impact of AI and formal proof assistance on math publishing. And now here comes the annotated version of that slide. Okay, so I speak about 1, 2, 3. Now, this is my definition of what the digital math library is, which is probably not yours, but I hope you will find mine interesting nevertheless. 4 is anything which has to do in particular with, in German, NFDI, Nationale Forschungsdateninfrastruktur, and the Mali project, and for that the expert is sitting there in the green-white striped t-shirt. Okay, and 5, I will not tell you anything about 5 because I hope you're going to tell me something. Okay, so that's where your expertise comes in. Doesn't have to be today, but in the long run, we have to find a way how to deal with it. I'm an editor. I get the first ChatGPT created papers. At the moment, for me as a normal human, it's very easy to recognize them, but there will come a day where it's not easy anymore. And what will I do that day? Okay, so I will start telling you a few things about trying to get an overview, actually, about mathematical publishing by means of the survey among publishers. So, for example, this is relatively easy because this is based on central data. So far, Springer and Elsevier, we know that they make up for about 40% of all math publishing, right? And then comes Taylor Francis, Wiley, World Scientific, and so on. So we see in Centralblatt there were like 120,000 journal papers in 2020, okay? And the 25 largest publishers account for more than 2/3 of the articles, okay? There are some which are the big players in the field, we're not surprised of that, but you can also find, if you go for it, actually smaller ones, and that's clear because actually as soon as you drop below 1%, that's actually very fast. I mean, that's after rank number 13, okay? So the selection is not as large as we want, and trying to secure the diversity, even if it's in the percent range, I believe is crucial. Competition is always good. Okay, what was even more surprising is when dealing with publisher houses and having these interviews, so there was a huge variety of perspectives and opinions about science publishing. There is no consensus about what the future of publishing might be. So what is the strategy for the next 10, 15 years? Or how to get there, how to do the transition. I mean, printed books are not the future, whether we like it or not. What are the criteria, and how would key publishing decisions be made? And all in all, I find this rather disturbing because despite all the changes and technological progress in the past years, it's still unclear. Where are we going? For mathematics, where old papers matter a lot, one positive thing at least is that the largest players opened already before or as a consequence of our discussions, archives typically 5 years back, right? Either for hosting and offering free access, even if perhaps not under a perfect license. So maybe you're not allowed to download them and to archive them on a different repository, but at least one has access to them. Okay, and this is one of the things where we want to continue. So possible recommendations for dealing with publishers, for large libraries, national societies, and so on would be that you would like to recommend the mathematics journals, all of them, make all articles really available no more than 5 years after publication, and you won't have difficulties finding examples where that's not the case. Right? Including articles for which there is at least a scan available. Articles should be made permanently available 5 years after publication on a non-restricted license. And that's a lot of discussion. And if you have thought about licenses, I'd be happy to get your feedback about that, whether it's CCBY or BYND. So ND means you're only allowed to integrate, but no derivatives. Okay? Which of these licenses might be preferable? Okay? No derivatives would include that you're not allowed to translate the document, for example, right? And so the difference between the two is kind of subtle, and opinions diverge. Copyright should remain with the authors, so sometimes it's a problem to make old material available. Just the authors are dead, you don't find them anymore. And so it's not because there's somebody mean who wants to avoid it, but you just have a licensing problem because it was done decades ago. Right, and somehow so the publishing agreement with the author should be guaranteed in such a way that after the death or the retirement of the author, you don't run into problems. Okay, we would like to have some kind of best practice guidance for publishers so that manuscripts should be allowed to be deposited on archive and so on, and not as part of like in a gray zone way. It's not allowed, but they're not going to complain, but you're actually allowed to do it, right? And have it on personal websites immediately. And right, so what is there, so should there be here, this would be the compromise of an embargo of 6 months for public repositories, immediately would be better, of course, right? But this problem has not been solved in the past decades. I don't know of any math journal who would complain if you put it on the archive, despite the fact they don't allow it. I don't know whether from your community you have heard about serious problems in that direction.
Yeah.
That would be something I'd like to know.
EasyChair. Andrei, EasyChair. The EasyChair is a publisher who has a problem of people putting stuff on archive because like they claim it steals their credit.
Can you tell me the name of the publisher again?
Well, I don't want to diss them too much because Andrei Vorkov is a very good theory-proving person. But like, they do have a problem. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
And sometimes the flip side is a large number of countries now obligate you to deposit in a public repository if you've been funded by any kind of federal authority. And so the publishers can just go sue that government. It has nothing to do with me.
Right.
The laws of my country said I must do this. I'm done.
Yes, but a conflict will arise nevertheless. Totally right, yeah. So that's where we would like to make progress on making this gray zone slightly, to put some light on it, right? Easy, but I will take a note that this is true, I was not aware. Yes.
I wanted to make a proposal. I mean, you didn't say that you wanted to do a work group on that, did you?
I did actually.
Oh, great, because I think there's much more discussion to be had,
Yeah, that's right.
and I'm worried about.
Yeah, well, so what we can do is we will just stop with this report, have the second talk and continue in the afternoon, whoever wants, with the other two topics which we had, which are just the digital math library and the our citation culture problem. Would that be a strategy?
That would be a good strategy, I think.
Okay, so let me remember, I think I have a third slide for...
You still have 5 minutes.
I still have 5 minutes.
But I think there's lots of questions already kind of popping up.
Yeah, and that's exactly the kind of feedback I need, I would like to hear. And since you're not my normal peer group, it's particularly valuable for me to have the feedback from you, right? Okay, the archive is a great partner for all science. And we at least at our committee believe that one of the best investments we can make in terms of time, not of money because we don't have money, is to help or to organize a community help which might be needed to make the archive fit for the decades to come. Okay, and to make clear how important it is to the mathematical community and to give all the support needed for its continued existence. Yes,
Yeah.
Moritz.
Yeah, I wanted to add, at least from our perspective as a Maori project who collects like research data and things like that, the archive is much more important than the published PDF because it's much easier to extract information from the archive than from some published information. So we really encourage everyone to upload a paper to the archive explicitly where you have the LaTeX code, in addition to putting it on some publishers' preprint repository. So I would really support the idea to use the actual archive and not some publishers' repos.
So to learn from best practices, how did high energy physics do it? That community, you know, if it's not on the archive, it doesn't exist.
Yes, that's right.
So what did they do right that we should just copy?
They invented internet? That's what they always claim. Well, this must have happened like 20 years ago, how they actually did the negotiations with their publishers, like Physical Letters, Physical Reviews, and these. That's a good question. I don't know the answer, but I will try to find out. Okay.
One more on that, if I may.
Sure.
This is the problem that the archive is not as open as we think it is, right? I mean, that's the stuff that Dayan Guinev kind of is trying to make it more open in the sense that we want to be able, I mean, it's the stuff that you're already talking about, legal gray zones, because apparently, and correct me if I'm getting it wrong, but apparently when the archive first started, the default license was not a completely open one, and hence, sorry?
The default still isn't. You have to click a button to say, I want it more open.
Oh God.
And so all the first 2 million papers are under this funny, you can't republish and those kind of things, license.
And what we want to do is kind of actually extract more information from those papers, right? So
Exactly. I mean, we've heard it in the first talk yesterday, right? The archive is also a database for doing research on it, be it mathematical syntax, concepts, but also trends in mathematics, right? I mean, just as Google can see when there's a influenza wave coming, we can see mathematical trend on the archive, and it has this compromise between being rather open, but having some kind of moderation nevertheless. So the worst junk is we're out of it, which is good. Right? And I managed to support that. By the way, they are in urgent need for new moderators. If you have 1 or 2 hours to spare per week, then I would be very interested in your application as a moderator. And if you don't know where it's hidden on their webpage, I will tell you where it is, because you need to know. So what's in the back?
Yes. So following up on what I said earlier and the new slides we have, I have a question. Let's make it a bit more of a workshop. For the researchers in this group who use the archive as input for doing research that presumably they will then publish in a more open way, is there a preferred license on the archive of the form CC by some derivative work that works for them? Some derivative means authorized translations, authorized research on it, and can be published openly, but not captured in a sense. So this is, there is a need for those researchers to express very precisely the type of derivative work they want to do in order to enable the default options on the archive to be aligned with those interests.
We haven't, these copyright issues are such a material. But we have a meeting with the representative. So the problem with So the challenge with archive was that the person in charge of mathematics changed. And there was like an interregnum for quite a while, so that the old contact person wasn't there anymore, but the new one hadn't yet started and had to get into the business. But we have a meeting with the new contact person in September. So this is on our agenda to discuss with them.
Yeah, do you think we could, to try to keep them to the schedule, do you think you could wrap up for the time being?
Absolutely, I will. So, yeah, here's the last slide on this part of, about this research on publishers and the survey we did. One thing we learned is that in different countries, the level of organization between librarians is very different. And we recommend everybody to go home and find out how the math and computer science librarian, and not in the sense of I'm buying books, but librarian in the sense of interconnecting different libraries and places to get a qualified opinion about how to deal towards publisher houses, but also how to develop new initiatives, how to get into making data available, creating the infrastructure, supporting the infrastructure, so taking an active lead in it. And some countries are doing an extremely good job on that. So this is, I believe, a change in perspective about what is a librarian, right, that needs to be done. So this is something, an idea I would like to, a seed I would like to put into you to understand that these are partners in doing the transition. At the end of all these discussions, we would like to discourage any use of article processing charges as a model for open access of articles, right? And to make this a clear statement of the IMU. Moving to the past. And promote the less well-known options like Diamond Open Access and the Subscribe to Open model, right? Subscribe to Open, so Subscribe to Open is that you need a certain amount of subscriptions from libraries to guarantee the finances of a journal or bundle of journals, typically, right? And if the threshold is reached, then it gets open for everybody. For example, this is the model that the European Math Society Press, EMS Press, decided to use. And we believe it's a good compromise between getting the money you need to run the journals, right? Having enough libraries to say, okay, we support the community by paying. Obviously, everybody says, oh, but if the others pay, then it's gonna be open. It's not gonna work. Okay, and support all initiatives. They are in this direction, right? And possibly, that's not yet clear, but the London Mathematical Society has a code of conduct. And my goal is somewhere in the middle-term future would be to have an IMU code of conduct of similar term. And then anybody can reference to it and say, hey, that's a recommendation and you're not following it and we're not going to deal with you because of that. Right, I think that's the point to stop here. Thank you so much.